The CEO roared with laughter on the company's rooftop terrace. "Pilot this helicopter and I'll marry you," he scoffed, looking at Andrea. The custodian with calloused hands climbed into the cabin with determination. What happened in the next few minutes froze his smile forever. "Before we get into today's story, let me know where you're watching from. Go ahead and grab a coffee or get comfy on the couch, and please don't forget to support us. All you have to do is hit that like button, and I'll know you enjoy this kind of story. So, you ready? Let's begin." The sound of the vacuum cleaner echoed through the 23rd floor of Hayes Aviation, the largest aviation company in the region. Andrea pushed the cleaning cart along the marble corridors, her worn-out sneakers making as little noise as possible. It was 6 in the morning, and she always came in early to finish her work before the executives arrived. Through the windows of the main office, she could see the company helicopter parked on the helipad, an imposing machine gleaming in the morning light. For a few seconds, she stopped and watched, her hands tightening on her cleaning cloth. "Mom, are you okay?" Her daughter's soft voice came from behind her. Andrea turned around quickly. Sophia, only 8 years old, was standing at the office entrance, holding her school backpack. "What are you doing up here, sweetheart? You were supposed to wait downstairs." "The lady at the front desk said I could come up. I forgot my math notebook at home." Sophia walked over to the window and followed her mother's gaze. "That's a cool helicopter." "It is." Andrea ran a hand through her daughter's hair. "But you need to get to school now. You can't be late." "Mom, why are you always looking at flying things? Airplanes, helicopters?" The girl's innocent question made Andrea's heart ache. How could she explain to a child that her mother once flew through the skies, that she had commanded machines much larger than that one, that she'd had a completely different life? "Just curious, honey. Now go on. I'll finish up here and meet you at school this afternoon." Sophia gave her mother a kiss and ran for the elevator. Andrea was alone again, but this time she avoided looking at the helicopter. She had work to do. The hours passed quickly. The building filled with executives in expensive suits, hurried secretaries, and the constant buzz of a company that never stopped. Andrea moved like a shadow among them, invisible, just another employee keeping everything clean and tidy. It was late afternoon when she overheard the conversation that would change everything. "Ethan Hayes is here." One of the secretaries was chatting with a colleague near the coffee machine. The CEO came in person to oversee the new project. Andrea knew the man's reputation. Ethan Hayes, heir to a family fortune, had taken over the company at 35 and had since become known not only for his business success, but for his arrogance and inflated ego. Office gossip always mentioned his extravagant parties, his imported cars, and his tendency to humiliate employees he considered beneath him. "I heard he's doing a demonstration with the helicopter tonight," the secretary continued. "There's going to be a rooftop party for the investors." Andrea finished cleaning the area and headed for the supply closet. It was none of her business what the CEO did or didn't do. Her only concern was finishing her work, getting her paycheck at the end of the month, and taking care of her daughter. But as she put away the cleaning products, she couldn't help but think of the secretary's words, a demonstration with the helicopter. It had been so long since she had heard the sound of rotors spinning, since she had felt the adrenaline of being in command of a flying machine. She shook her head. Those thoughts led nowhere. Her life was different now, and she had made peace with that a long time ago. Or at least, that's what she tried to convince herself every day. The rooftop party was in full swing when Andrea went up to do the final cleaning of the top-floor restrooms. The sound of laughter and animated conversation spilled through the glass doors, mixed with the clinking of glasses and soft background music. Through the windows, she could see the executives and investors, all impeccably dressed, celebrating another successful deal. She tried to be discreet, but it was impossible not to notice the activity around the helicopter. Ethan Hayes was at the center of attention, gesturing dramatically as he explained the machine's specifications to a group of interested men. "This beauty costs over $5 million. His voice carried the arrogant tone he always used when he wanted to impress someone. "I fly it myself, of course. Not just anyone has the skill to command a machine like this." The men laughed and nodded, clearly impressed. Andrea quickly finished her work, anxious to get out of there before anyone noticed her presence. But as she headed for the exit, she heard one of the women at the party comment, "Ethan, you're always bragging about your skills, but what if someone here could fly better than you?" The CEO turned with a dismissive smile. "Impossible. You have no idea of the complexity involved. It takes years of training, sharp reflexes, advanced technical knowledge. It's not for just anyone." "But what if it was?" the woman insisted, clearly amused by the situation. "What would you do?" Ethan let out a loud, theatrical laugh. "If anyone here can fly this helicopter better than me, I'll marry them on the spot." The group burst into laughter. It was obvious he was joking, but there was a real arrogance in his words, an absolute certainty that no one there could challenge him in his own area of expertise. It was at that moment that Andrea took a wrong step. The cleaning bucket she was carrying slipped from her hands, making a loud clatter as it hit the floor. The entire party turned to look in the direction of the sound, and she found herself exposed under the curious gazes of people who normally didn't even notice her existence. "Sorry," she mumbled, quickly bending down to pick up the scattered supplies. "I didn't mean to interrupt." Ethan watched her for a moment, and then his face lit up with a malicious idea. "Well, look at this. We have an unexpected audience." He walked toward her, and Andrea felt the weight of every guest's stare. Her first instinct was to get out of there as fast as possible, but something in the CEO's expression made her stop. "You heard our conversation, didn't you?" he asked, his tone condescending. "What do you think? Know anyone who can fly a helicopter?" Andrea felt her blood boil. It wasn't the first time she had witnessed his arrogance, but it had never been directed at her. "I wouldn't know," she replied, keeping her voice calm. "Of course you wouldn't." Ethan laughed, turning to the guests as if she were part of the entertainment. "Folks, how about we make this more interesting?" He turned his attention back to Andrea, who was still crouched down, gathering her supplies. "You there? What's your name again?" "Andrea." "Andrea." He repeated the name as if it were a joke. "Andrea, how about a proposal? If you can fly this helicopter, I'll keep my word. I'll marry you." The entire party erupted in laughter. He was obviously mocking her, using her as entertainment for his wealthy guests. Andrea stood up slowly, gripping the bucket tightly. Her eyes met his, and for a moment something different passed between them. A spark he couldn't identify. "And if I accept?" she asked, surprising everyone, including herself. The silence that followed was deafening. Ethan blinked several times as if unsure he had heard correctly. The guests stopped laughing, looking between him and Andrea with a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. "I'm sorry, what?" he asked, his voice still laced with amusement, but with a new note of surprise. Andrea felt all the emotions she had bottled up for years rising to the surface. The constant humiliation of being treated as invisible, the frustration of having to hide who she really was, the anger at seeing men like Ethan play with people's lives as if it were a game. "I said I accept," she repeated more firmly this time. "Your proposal. If I can fly the helicopter, you keep your word." A murmur of astonishment rippled through the group. Ethan looked around, clearly not expecting the situation to escalate this far. Some guests looked uncomfortable, others were intrigued by the unfolding drama. "Look, lady," he began, trying to regain control. "I was joking. You can't just—" "Why not?" Andrea interrupted him. "Are you scared?" The words were out before she could think better of them. The rooftop fell, completely silent. Ethan stared at her with an expression that was a mix of disbelief and irritation. "Scared," he repeated, his voice rising a few notches. "Me? Of a—" He hesitated, searching for the right words. "Of a custodian." "Then prove it," she challenged. "Or are your words worthless?" The tension in the air was palpable. Andrea knew she had crossed a line, that she would probably be fired the next day, but something inside her refused to back down. She was tired of being underestimated, tired of living a lie. Ethan looked at his guests, who were now watching him with renewed attention. His reputation was on the line. Backing down now would be admitting that a cleaning lady had publicly challenged him and won. "Fine," he said finally, forcing a confident smile. "But when you fail, and you will fail, I want you to apologize publicly and admit you were being ridiculous." "And when I succeed," Andrea replied, "you keep your word, in front of everyone." One of the investors, an older man with grey hair, stepped forward. "Ethan, maybe this isn't a good idea. What if she gets hurt? The legal liability." "She's not going to get hurt," Ethan replied quickly, "because she won't even be able to start the engine." He walked over to the helicopter, followed by the curious crowd. Andrea walked behind them, her heart pounding. It had been 5 years since she had last flown anything, 5 years since she had left her old life behind. "The keys," Ethan said, pulling them from his pocket and dangling them in the air like a trophy. "But before I hand them over, are you sure you want to go through this humiliation?" Andrea held out her hand without hesitating. "I'm sure." He placed the keys in her palm, his fingers brushing against hers for a moment. "I hope you have good life insurance," he muttered, loud enough for a few guests to hear and laugh nervously. She climbed into the pilot's cabin, her hands trembling slightly as they touched the controls. The familiar feeling of the cockpit enveloped her, like an old friend's embrace. For a moment, she closed her eyes and allowed herself to remember. She remembered the days of flying over mountains and oceans, the precision required for complex maneuvers, the pure adrenaline of being in command of a powerful machine. She also remembered the accident that changed everything, the difficult decision to leave it all behind to protect her infant daughter. When she opened her eyes, Ethan was standing beside the cabin, arms crossed, waiting to witness what he was sure would be a spectacular failure. "Any questions before you begin?" he asked sarcastically. Andrea fastened her seatbelt and put on the headset. "Just one," she replied, looking him directly in the eye. "Where do you want me to land it afterward?" Andrea's question echoed across the terrace like silent thunder. Ethan frowned, unable to decide if she was being serious or just trying to keep up the charade. "You haven't even started the engine yet," he said, trying to sound amused, but there was a note of uncertainty in his voice. Andrea didn't answer. Instead, she began a systematic check of all the instruments, her hands moving with a precision that surprised even herself. Altimeter, airspeed indicator, fuel gauge, hydraulic controls. Each check was performed with the methodology of someone who had done it thousands of times. The guests moved closer, intrigued by the complete change in the custodian's demeanor. There was no more nervousness in her movements, only an intense professional focus. "Ethan," one of the investors murmured, "she looks like she knows what she's doing." "Impossible," he replied, though his voice was less confident. "She must have seen it in movies or something." Andrea adjusted the headset microphone and looked at him through the cabin window. "I need everyone to stand back at least 30 feet. The turbulence can be dangerous." "Turbulence," Ethan repeated. "You haven't even—" His words were cut off by the sound of the engine starting. The familiar roar of the turbines filled the air, and the rotor blades began to turn slowly, gaining speed with each second. The crowd automatically took several steps back, instinctively recognizing the power of the awakening machine. Ethan stayed where he was, but his eyes were fixed on Andrea with a new intensity. Inside the cabin, she felt as if she had come home after a long journey. Her fingers danced over the controls with a familiarity that transcended the years she had been away. The helicopter responded to every adjustment like a musical instrument in the hands of a virtuoso. "Air traffic control, this is Hayes Aviation Helicopter." She spoke into the radio, her voice clear and professional, requesting permission for a demonstration flight in local airspace. Ethan rushed closer to the cabin, his eyes wide. "How do you know the radio frequency? How do you know the procedures?" But Andrea was no longer paying attention to him. She had received clearance from the control tower and was now completely focused on takeoff. The helicopter lifted smoothly from the helipad, rising a few dozen feet before stabilizing in the air. There were no jerks, no hesitation, just a perfect, controlled ascent. The crowd on the terrace fell into absolute silence. Some people were taking photos and videos with their phones, hardly believing what they were witnessing. The custodian they saw every day cleaning offices was flying a helicopter as if she were born to do it. Andrea made a complete circle around the building, maintaining a constant altitude and speed. Then she executed a maneuver that made several guests hold their breath, a controlled spiral descent, ending in a lateral approach to the helipad that demonstrated a level of skill few professional pilots possessed. "My God," one of the women whispered, "she's better than most pilots I've ever seen." Ethan was completely motionless, watching every move with a mixture of shock and something that could only be described as respect. His expression had completely changed. There was no longer any trace of mockery or condescension. The helicopter landed with impressive smoothness. Exactly in the center of the helipad, the rotors gradually slowed to a complete stop. The engine was shut down, and the silence that followed was even more impactful than the roar of the turbines. Andrea removed the headset, opened the cabin door, and slowly climbed down. Her eyes met Ethan's, who was watching her, as if seeing her for the very first time. "Where?" she asked, her voice calm and controlled. "Would you like me to land it next time?" The silence stretched for several long seconds. Ethan stared at her as if trying to solve an impossible puzzle, his mind struggling to process what he had just witnessed. The guests whispered among themselves, their gazes shifting between Andrea and the CEO, awaiting his reaction. "How?" was the only word he managed to articulate. Andrea crossed her arms, maintaining the composure she had shown throughout the flight. "How what? How did you... where did you learn? This is impossible." Ethan ran a hand through his hair, clearly shaken. "You're a custodian. You've been working here for 2 years cleaning offices." "And that means I can't have other skills?" she asked, her voice remaining calm, but with a firmness that did not go unnoticed. One of the investors approached, still holding the phone he had used to record the entire flight. "Ma'am, that was extraordinary. Where did you serve? Military? Commercial aviation?" Andrea hesitated for a moment. That question forced her to confront a past she had worked so hard to bury. "That doesn't matter," she finally replied. "Of course it matters!" Ethan exploded, his confusion turning to frustration. "Nobody just shows up knowing how to fly like that. You deliberately deceived me." "I didn't deceive anyone," Andrea retorted, her patience beginning to wear thin. "You made a public proposal. I accepted. I held up my end of the bargain. Now what?" The question hung in the air like a dare. Everyone present knew exactly what she was asking. Ethan had made a specific promise in front of witnesses, and now he was being called on it. "You can't be serious," he said, letting out a nervous laugh. "That was a joke. A moment of... a joke?" Andrea took a step toward him, and for the first time that night it was Ethan who stepped back. "You used my presence here as entertainment for your guests. You publicly humiliated me. And now that you've lost the game you created, you want to change the rules." Murmurs of approval began to rise from the crowd. Some of the guests clearly sympathized with Andrea, impressed not only by her skill, but by the dignity she maintained in the face of the situation. "Ethan," said the older investor, "a man is only as good as his word." "You don't understand," Ethan protested, looking around for support. "She's not. We're not. This is ridiculous." "What's ridiculous?" Andrea asked. "The fact that I proved I can do something you thought was impossible? Or the fact that you've discovered a mere custodian can be more competent than you ever imagined?" The words cut deep. Ethan stared at her, and for the first time, he truly saw her. Not the invisible employee who cleaned the offices, but the woman who had just demonstrated skills that few possessed. The woman who had accepted his challenge when any sensible person would have simply walked away. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice softer now, stripped of its previous arrogance. Andrea was silent for a moment, considering the question. It was an opportunity to reveal everything, to explain her past, to justify her skills. But a part of her resisted. There were reasons she had chosen a simple life, reasons she hid who she really was. "I'm someone who takes words seriously," she finally answered. "Are you?" The question echoed across the terrace. Ethan looked around, aware that everyone was waiting for his answer. His reputation, his credibility, it all depended on what he said next. "I need time to process this," he said, avoiding her gaze. "Of course," Andrea nodded. "You have until tomorrow to decide if you're a man of your word or not." And without waiting for a reply, she turned and walked toward the exit, leaving behind a terrace full of stunned people and a CEO who was questioning everything he thought he knew about life. Andrea didn't sleep that night. Sitting in the small kitchen of her modest apartment, she sipped her third coffee while watching Sophia do her math homework at the table. The girl worked with concentration, oblivious to the emotional storm her mother was facing. "Mom, you're acting weird today," Sophia commented without looking up from her notebook. "Did something happen at work?" "Why do you ask, honey? You've been stirring your coffee for 15 minutes and haven't taken a sip, and you're staring at nothing." Andrea smiled sadly. Sophia had always been too observant for her age. It was one of the consequences of growing up with a single mother. The kids learned to read adult emotions with more accuracy than normal. "I'm just thinking about some decisions I might have to make." Sophia finally looked up. Decisions about what? How could she explain to an 8-year-old that her mother had just exposed a secret that could change their lives forever? How could she talk about the past she had hidden, about the reasons she had chosen an anonymous life? "Remember when we talked about how sometimes people have to choose between what's safe and what's right?" Sophia nodded. It was a conversation they'd had a few times, whenever the girl faced difficult situations at school. "Well, Mommy might have put herself in a situation like that today." What did you do?" Sophia asked, curious. "I showed some people that I know how to do things they never imagined." "Like what?" Andrea hesitated. Sophia knew nothing about her military past, about the years spent flying missions she could never discuss. To her daughter, her mother had always been a custodian, had always worked cleaning offices. "Things I learned before you were born, things I thought I'd never have to use again." The phone rang, interrupting the conversation. Andrea looked at the device with apprehension. It was almost 11 at night. Who would call so late? "Hello? Andrea, it's Ethan." The voice on the other end caught her completely by surprise. Sophia watched her curiously, noticing the change in her mother's expression. "How did you get my number?" "It's in the employee file," he answered. There was a different quality to his voice, less arrogance, more uncertainty. "I need to talk to you." "It's almost 11 at night. I know, I'm sorry, it's just I haven't been able to stop thinking about what happened today. Who are you, Andrea? She glanced at Sophia, who was pretending to be focused on her homework but was clearly listening to the conversation. I can't talk right now. Then when? Tomorrow. We need to resolve this situation. Resolve what exactly? There was a long pause on the other end. You know very well what. I made a public promise. The entire party was a witness. Andrea felt her heart race. And I'm a man of my word, even when it puts me in a complicated situation. She hadn't expected that answer. She had assumed he would find a way to wriggle out of the promise, perhaps using his position to simply ignore what had happened. Are you saying you intend to keep your word? I'm saying I need to understand the situation better before making any decisions. You completely surprised me today. Not just your piloting skills, which I have to admit are impressive, but the way you handled everything, the courage you showed. Andrea closed her eyes. This was not a conversation she was prepared to have. Where do you want to talk? How about my office tomorrow after business hours? All right, but on one condition. What is it? I want total honesty. If we're going to discuss this, I don't want any games, no manipulation, just the truth. Agreed, he said, and there was something in his voice that made her believe he was being sincere. But the same rule applies to you. I want to know who you really are, Andrea. After she hung up, she stared at the phone for a long time. Sophia had finished her homework and was watching her with concern. Mom, are you scared? A little, honey, a little. Of the man on the phone. Not of him. I'm scared of some truths I might have to tell. The next day, Andrea arrived at work earlier than usual. She wanted to finish all her tasks before her meeting with Ethan, but she also needed time to gather her thoughts. As she cleaned the offices, she noticed that some employees were looking at her differently. Word had spread about the previous night's events. Andrea, called Megan, the secretary from the finance department. Is it true you flew the boss's helicopter yesterday? She stopped wiping a desk and sighed. News travels fast around here. My cousin works for the catering company that served the party. She said it was incredible. Where did you learn to do that? It's complicated, Andrea replied, trying to end the conversation, but Megan wasn't the type to give up easily. Were you a pilot before? Did you work for an airline? Megan, I have a lot of work to do. The secretary got the hint and walked away, but Andrea could feel the curious stares of other employees. The invisibility she had carefully cultivated for 2 years had vanished completely. The hours dragged on. By the end of the workday, most of the employees had left. Andrea finished organizing her supplies and headed to the elevator. Her hands trembled slightly as she pressed the button for the 23rd floor. The door to Ethan's office was ajar. She knocked softly before entering. "Come in," his voice called from inside. Ethan was sitting behind his desk, but he didn't have his usual arrogant posture. He looked tired, as if he hadn't slept well either. When he saw her, he gestured for her to sit in the chair across from him. "Thank you for coming," he said, and she noted it was the first time he had treated her with courtesy. "I said I would." They sat in silence for a few moments, each sizing up the other. It was strange to be in that room as something more than the invisible custodian, to have the full attention of the man who previously hadn't even noticed her existence. "I'll get straight to the point," Ethan finally said. "I spent all night researching. I called contacts in military aviation, in civil aviation. No one knows an Andrea Jones with your skills. And what does that prove? That you're hiding something. Pilots like you don't just appear out of nowhere. That kind of precision, that control, that requires years of intensive training." Andrea took a deep breath. She knew this moment would come, but that didn't make it any easier. "You want the truth? That's what we agreed on. My last name isn't Jones. It's Vance. Andrea Vance. Ethan frowned as if the name meant something, but he couldn't quite place it. I served in the Air Force for 8 years. I was a combat rescue helicopter pilot. Medevac missions, rescues in hostile territory, special operations I can't discuss. Ethan's jaw dropped. You were in the military, the Air Force, and I was good at what I did. Very good. Why did you leave? Why are you working as a custodian if you had a career like that? This was the hardest part. Andrea closed her eyes for a moment, gathering the courage to tell a story she rarely revisited. There was an accident, a rescue mission that went wrong. Not my fault, a mechanical failure, but people died, people I was supposed to save. Her voice trembled slightly. When I found out I was pregnant with Sophia, I decided I didn't want to live with that weight anymore. I didn't want my daughter to grow up with a mother who carried the ghosts of war. So you changed your name and started a new life. Exactly. I thought I could leave it all behind. Just be a mom, have a simple, safe life. Ethan watched her with an expression she couldn't decipher. And did it work? Did you manage to forget? Andrea smiled sadly. Until last night, I thought so. But when I got into that helicopter, it was as if all these years were just a dream, as if I had finally come home. The silence in the office was profound. Ethan leaned back in his chair, processing the story he had just heard. Andrea remained quiet, giving him time to absorb the information. Andrea Vance. He repeated the name slowly. Now it makes sense. I knew that name from somewhere. She tensed up. What do you mean? My father had contracts with the military. We supplied parts for military helicopters for years. I remember hearing about a pilot named Vance who was considered a legend, a woman who had never lost a rescuee, who could fly in conditions other pilots considered impossible. That was a long time ago. Not that long. The stories were still circulating when I took over the company. Ethan leaned forward. You were famous, you know, among the military, among the suppliers. They said there was a pilot who could land anywhere, who never gave up on a mission. Andrea felt a mix of pride and melancholy. There was a time when those stories meant everything to her, when her identity was completely tied to her ability to save lives, to be the best at what she did. Then you know why I left, she said simply. The Arin Gol Valley incident. The name of the place hit her like a punch to the gut. Andrea closed her eyes, and for a moment she was back on that terrible day, hearing the screams over the radio, feeling the helicopter vibrate under her hands as she fought against impossible winds. How do you know about that? Because my father supplied the replacement parts after the investigation. The failure wasn't your fault, Andrea. It was a manufacturing defect in a hydraulic part. You couldn't have predicted it. But I could have tried something different. I could have. Saved 3 soldiers instead of 2, Ethan interrupted. According to the reports, you did the impossible. In weather conditions that should have made any rescue impossible, you managed to pull 2 men out of an active combat zone. The third died because of me. Died because he was in a war, not because you failed. Andrea opened her eyes and found him looking at her with an expression she had never seen before. Genuine respect, mixed with something that looked like admiration. Why are you telling me this? She asked. Ethan sighed and stood up, walking to the window that overlooked the helipad. Because I've spent my whole life thinking I was special, because I could fly a few machines. I grew up thinking I had talent, that I was a natural, and yesterday I found out that a woman who cleans my office is 100 times a better pilot than I will ever be. He turned to face her. It's made me question a lot of things about who I am, about how I treat people, about the assumptions I make. And about your promise. Ethan walked back to the desk but didn't sit down. Instead, he stood beside the chair, as if preparing for something important. Andrea, I made a stupid promise in an attempt to humiliate you. It was cruel and unnecessary, but a promise made in public is still a promise. You don't have to. Yes, I do. Not because I'm obligated, but because meeting you has changed something in me. Seeing your courage, your dignity, the way you faced my challenge, even knowing you could lose everything. He paused, as if carefully choosing his next words. But I can't ask you to marry me because of a foolish bet. It would be unfair to you, to your daughter, to myself. A decision like that needs to be based on something real. Andrea felt a mixture of relief and, was it disappointment? She wasn't sure what she had expected, but his response surprised her. So what are you proposing? A chance, an opportunity for us to get to know each other for real, to find out if there's anything here beyond a lost bet. Andrea was silent for several long minutes, processing Ethan's proposal. There was something surreal about the situation. Less than 24 hours ago, he didn't even know her name, and now he was suggesting they get to know each other. Do you have any idea what you're asking? She finally said. I'm asking for a chance to get to know the real woman, not the image I created in my head of who you were supposed to be. And I'm supposed to believe you've really changed, that you're no longer the arrogant man who humiliated me yesterday. Ethan looked down. I deserve that suspicion. But yes, something has changed. When I saw you fly that helicopter, when I heard your story, I realized I've spent years living in a bubble, surrounded by people who only tell me what I want to hear. He sat on the edge of his desk, a less formal posture than usual. You challenged me in a way no one ever has. And it wasn't just about flying, it was about character, about integrity. Ethan, I have a daughter. My life isn't simple. I can't just decide to give someone a chance without thinking about the consequences. I understand. And that's exactly why I'm not pushing you to accept my original promise. I'm proposing something different. Time for us to talk, to understand each other. Andrea stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the helicopter was illuminated by the lights of the helipad. And my job? Do I continue as a custodian while we get to know each other? No. The answer was immediate. I have a better offer. She turned to look at him, curious. I need a chief pilot, someone to coordinate our flight operations, train our pilots, and oversee maintenance. The salary is 15 times what you're currently making. Are you offering me a job out of pity? I'm offering you a job because you are qualified, more than qualified. You are exactly the kind of professional our company needs. Andrea felt her heart race. The possibility of flying professionally again, of using her skills, was too tempting to ignore. And what if it doesn't work out? Between us, I mean, would I lose the job? The job is yours based on merit, regardless of what happens between us personally. I have enough witnesses to your talent to justify the hiring. It was an incredible opportunity, but Andrea knew she couldn't make important decisions impulsively, not when Sophia was involved. I need time to think and to talk to my daughter. Of course. How much time do you need? A week? Perfect. Ethan returned to his chair. But can I ask you a question? You can. What does your daughter think of airplanes and helicopters? The question caught her by surprise. Why do you want to know? Because if we agree to get to know each other, I'll eventually need to meet her too. And I want to know if she'd be comfortable with a mother who starts flying professionally again. His consideration for Sophia touched something deep within Andrea. It was the kind of question a man truly interested in a shared life would ask. She's always been fascinated by planes, Andrea admitted. She wants to be a pilot when she grows up. Says she wants to be like... She hesitated. Like her mother. She doesn't know about my past. To her, I've always just been a custodian. Maybe it's time she knew the truth about her hero mother. The word hero echoed in the office. Andrea hadn't seen herself that way in years, but in Ethan's voice it sounded sincere. "I'll think about your offer," she said, heading for the door. "Andrea?" She turned. "Thank you for giving me this chance, for showing me there's a different way to see the world. Don't thank me yet. A week is long enough for you to realize this might not be what you really want, or for you to realize you deserve more than you thought was possible." When the door closed behind her, Andrea knew her life had changed forever. All that was left was to find out if it was for the better. A week later, Andrea was back in Ethan's office, but this time Sophia was with her. The little girl held her mother's hand tightly, curious but slightly intimidated by the luxurious surroundings. "So this is Sophia," Ethan said, kneeling to be at the girl's eye level. "Your mom told me you want to be a pilot when you grow up." Sophia nodded shyly. "My mom says you have a helicopter." "I do." "Want to see it?" The girl's eyes lit up, and she looked to Andrea for approval. "Can I, Mum?" "Of course, honey." The three of them walked out to the helipad. Sophia was mesmerized by the machine, asking 1,000 questions about how it worked, what it was for, and if it was hard to fly. Ethan answered each one patiently, and Andrea noticed how he tried to speak in a language a child could understand. "Sophia," Andrea said when she found the right moment, "I need to tell you something important. About me, about what I did before you were born." The girl looked at her with full attention. "I was a pilot, honey, a military pilot. I flew helicopters just like this one on very important missions." Sophia's jaw dropped. "You? But you clean offices." "That's right, I do, but before that I was a pilot, a very good one." "Why did you stop?" Andrea glanced at Ethan, who gave her an encouraging nod. "Because I wanted more time to take care of you, and because sometimes people need time to heal from invisible wounds." "Invisible wounds?" "Sadness in your heart, sweetheart. Things that happened that made me sad for a while." Sophia processed the information with the seriousness only children can muster. "And now? Are the wounds healed?" "They're healing. And Ethan has offered me a chance to fly again, for work. But that would mean a lot of changes for both of us." "What kind of changes?" "Well," Ethan interjected gently, "your mom would be the boss of all the pilots in the company. She'd have her own office, and she'd make a lot more money. You could move into a bigger house, maybe with a yard." "And helicopters?" Sophia asked, her eyes shining. "Your mom would fly helicopters every day." Sophia turned to Andrea with a serious expression. "Mom, do you want to fly again?" Her daughter's direct question caught her off guard. "I do, honey, more than I ever thought I'd want to again." "Then you should do it. I want you to be happy." The simplicity of her answer made Andrea smile. "It's not just about the job, Sophia. Ethan and we're trying to see if we can be friends. Special friends." Sophia looked from Andrea to Ethan, sizing them up with a child's natural insight. "Is he nice to you, Mom?" "He is. And does he like helicopters?" "He does," Ethan answered. "And I'm learning to like other things too, like honest conversations, brave people, and little girls who ask smart questions." Sophia smiled. "Okay then, but if he's mean to you, Mom, I'll teach him some karate moves I learned at school." The three of them laughed, and Andrea felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the feeling that maybe, just maybe, it was possible to have a life that included both safety and dreams come true. 3 months later, Andrea was at the controls of a helicopter again, this time on a medical rescue mission. Beside her, Ethan watched with admiration as she navigated difficult weather conditions with the precision of an artist. "We saved another life today," he said through the headset. "No," Andrea corrected, smiling. "We all did. This is a team effort." When they landed at the hospital, Ethan took her hand. You know you don't have to prove anything to anyone anymore, right? I know, but now it's not about proving. It's about being who I really am. 6 months later, in a simple ceremony on the company helipad, with Sophia as the flower girl and all the employees as witnesses, Andrea and Ethan were married, not because of a foolish bet, but because they discovered that sometimes the best stories begin when someone has the courage to show the world who they really are. And if you enjoyed this story, share it with someone who needs a reminder that it's never too late to be true to yourself. Leave a comment telling us your favorite part, and don't forget to subscribe for more heartwarming stories. Until next time.